Welcome to Change the Narrative. I'm your host, JD Fuller.
I'm Susie Younger,
an African-American licensed psychotherapist.
I'm also a licensed therapist.
We talk about the isms. We talk about the phobias, anything that marginalizes and oppresses.
As a white woman, I ask the questions white people are too afraid to ask.
Everything we are not and everything we are is because of fear. Through a mental health lens, Susie and I will have difficult conversations with celebrity guests, political activists, and everyone in between. Our mind will tell us whatever we want to believe, but the truth lives in the body, and that's where change occurs. Are you ready to change the narrative?
We are so excited for our guest today. Dax Devlon Ross is an author, an activist, an educator, and a fierce social and civil rights leader. He's dedicated and committed his life to identifying and dismantling structures of power and privilege. He holds a Juris Doctorate from the prestigious George Washington Law School. He's been honored by the National Association of Black Journalists for his investigative reporting, and he's been featured and recognized in some of the most esteemed forums, from Time Magazine to The Guardian to the New York Times and the Washington Post, just to name a few. He's authored 6 books, including his newest, Letters to My White Friends, which we can't wait to hear about today. We are so honored to have him here and share his story and his truth. Welcome.
Wow, and thank you so much for having me, but also I love that introduction. I want to listen to this guy talk now. What's he got to say?
Thank you. It's all about you.
So, Dax Devlon Ross, what a name. Where did you get this name? It's amazing.
Well, so my dad and my mom went to see a movie back in the early 70s called The Adventurers, which was based off of a book by the same name, The Adventurers. And this film started some of the big Hollywood actors of its day, like Candice Bergen was in it. And I'm trying to remember some of the other big names in it, but I've seen this film on Netflix and it's not a very good film at all. It's a terrible film. But the main character's name is Dax. And he's a young kid who grows up to become this, what I call a swashbuckler. You know, he sees his entire family killed in front of him and he seeks revenge and vengeance and he becomes an international playboy. It's a whole thing. And I think my parents must have seen it like, that's going to call him Dax. Now, fast forward in my mid-20s, I decided to do a little research and try to understand what does Dax even stand for? Because throughout my life, I'd ask my dad, like, what does it mean? My mom, what does it mean? And no one had an answer for me. So when I found the book that it was based on, I got the acronym. The acronym DAX stands for Diogenes Alejandros Xenos. And Diogenes was the original philosopher, cynic philosopher from antiquity. I'm not sure what Alejandros still means, but it could have something to do with Alexander. And then Xenos, the closest approximation I could come to that was on the periodic table, xenon. And then when you look up the sort of root, sort of Latin roots of the word, it's like weird and strange. So I've taken that meaning for myself of this cynic philosopher, this person who set about in his life kind of challenging societal mores, and use that as my own kind of mantra and mantle for my life. So that's where the Dax comes from. The Devlon, the last thing I'll say, the Devlon, my mom's name is Evelyn. So I assume that it was a sort of a nod to her. And so the Devlon was a nod to Evelyn. That's my assumption, but no one's confirmed it yet.
Okay, well, it's a great story. I wish I had an equally great story about my names, but I don't, so I won't try. I love it. Thank you so much. Can you tell us about one of the most influential moments in your life? What kind of set you on your path?
I mean, there's really so many stories that I'm sure I could tell, but I think for me, if I think about this particular path, one of them was, and I write about this, one of them was being arrested when I was 19 years old at a protest. I always tell people I was a dilettante. I was not someone who ever thought about or interested himself in activism and social change work. But I found myself at a march that was protesting something that was happening on the campus at Rutgers University. A few days later, I got a summons and I was arrested One of only 3 people out of thousands of people that were there at the march. I was somehow plucked out of the crowd and arrested along with 2 other Black males. And I had to go to trial. And something about that experience of being shuffled through the system, it really woke me up. Really woke me up to how easily anyone can be brought into the system and cycle through it. So that was a really important turning point for me. And if I could offer like another one that I think is connected to that,
Sure.
a little bit later in life, I think for me, going to South Africa when I was in law school was a transformative experience. And I write about it in the book a little bit. I arrived the day that Thabo Mbeki was inaugurated as the president. And this was right after the period of Nelson Mandela's presidency. And just to be in South Africa and at that moment in time to see a country in transition and the ways in which people who look like me were still suffering under the boot of oppression that was so blatant, so obvious, so present everywhere. No one seemed to question it. It was like this thing, like no one seemed to have it. And I was like, it helped me start to see my own society and my own situation in a new light. And I think in many ways that experience of being in South Africa was liberatory for me. And there's so many reasons why, but those 2 I think were very important in terms of me understanding the political nature of my body, the political nature of my life, and therefore what am I going to do about it and with it?
I think it's these stories are so perfect because you talk about being from the middle class, and so and having the ability to become educated the way that you did, and so it's really important for people to understand that when you have that experience, it's easy not to be affected if you've never been affected. And so that's what's so powerful about what you're saying, is that when it hits hard. And what a reality check it is. That doesn't matter where you grow up. If your skin is brown, it's problematic potentially in terms of how society sees you. So that's powerful stories. Thank you. Thank you for both of them. They're great.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So talk about your business, your company, a disruptive equity venture. Tell us what that means. Where'd that come from?
Well, the short answer is that it makes DEV, so you got Dev, so you got the Dax Dev.
I missed that one, Dev. I can't believe that got by me.
Oh, we did miss that.
I consider myself so sharp. I can't believe that got by me. On you.
No, so my wife, who's my partner and everything I do, she and I were traveling and we were sort of playing with the idea at the time. I was still working. I was running an organization, and I really was thinking about my next move and what I wanted to do and how I wanted to get back into the world of consulting and be disruptive. I mean, that was. To me, it's the challenge of there's a lot of ways you could show up as a consultant. You can show up and it really depends on who you're there to serve. If you're there to serve power, then more than likely it's going to be very challenging for you to be in a disruptive state. If you understand that what your role is and who you are there to do and to serve is the people, and the people is writ large, it's all people. It's like to not serve power is to different. It's to understand that even people who hold positional power can be beholden to power as well. So how do you even liberate those folks? So a lot of my work is about disrupting sort of the status quo, but to do it in a way that's empathetic and gentle enough to help people through that process, because it's not about just blowing something up. It's about helping people shake it up to the extent that they are ready to and willing to, so that they can begin to do the work they want to do in order to become who they believe that they could be and should be in the world. And that's hard because the alignment between our values, like the things we say we are, and our actions is often off, because we live in a society, in a capitalist society, that often requires us to do stuff that's maybe at odds with our principles and our values. So part of my work is to help people align and calibrate so that they can do that work in better congruity with what their inner work, their inner hope and inner being is.
Okay. And so you said that an essay called "A Letter to a White Friend" evolved into a book. Talk to us about the essay and why you thought it was important to write it.
That's a great. I always tell people that it was not a contrived effort, and I've said it so many times now, I question myself, was it contrived? I don't know. You start to say this over and over again, but I do have distinct recollection of a series of phone calls that I received from my friends that generated a sense of unease inside of me. And that unease was really about this sense that even in 2020, as it was at that moment in time, my friends, my white friends in particular, were not able to connect to the ways in which the harm that we were experiencing implicated them as well. It felt as though when I was talking to them and they were calling me, it was trying to process what was happening through my experience versus through their own experience, which opened up to me a sense that we have either numbed ourselves to, my friends had either numbed themselves to, or had not done the deep work throughout their lives that would allow them to be awakened to the ways in which the things that we're watching and witnessing are harming them too, are harmful to them as well. That it is not just me because I'm a Black person and that experiences harm associated with oppression, that it's even people who believe themselves to be benefiting from an oppressive structure and system are actually experiencing harm in other ways. It's just that we need to help shift the gaze enough for them to understand what that harm actually does and how it shows up in their lives.
So before you go on to say more about the essay, I just want to talk about that gaze.
Yeah.
I'm challenged by that. And I'm challenged by that after being on the earth for, 62 years, because, noticing the gaze and making space for the gaze hasn't done much for us. I have tried historically to speak in a way that's comforting and creating space for white bodies and how they are affected by this, because they are psychologically, even if they don't know that they are, because of the privilege. And the problem with that is that the privilege still protects. The privilege still protects. Like, you go in there with all that empathy, and I know there's people who are going to hear your work. I know it's important work, and it's going to shift views for sure.
Yeah.
And I wonder, how much more do we have to give of ourselves to get a shift when this is not our war? It's not our war. White supremacy and racism is not ours to own. So talk to me about how you see that making a greater impact on the struggle.
Yeah. So I think it's always a choice that we have to make. And I made a very intentional choice when I decided to write this book in particular, that I was going to engage in that work. And I recognize that particularly in 2020 and 2021, there are people who look like me who were like, Dax, what are you doing? Why are you putting your talents? I've had editors who, when we were pitching the book, they were like, brother, why are you using your talents in this way? Black editors say that to me. And I think what it is for me is that I could not live in, and this is part of what I write about in the introduction to the book, I could not live in alignment with my own life if I didn't do this work. Because if I look at my own life, my own friendship circles that date and trace back throughout my journey from the time I was a little boy all the way to now, to even people who've opened doors for me and people who I've been in deep relationship with, I have white male friends throughout my story. And so in many ways, what helped me do my work was, I'm gonna write to them. I'm not writing to, if everybody else picks it up, and that's why the book is actually to my white male friends. It's not just to my white friends, it's to my white male friends. I chose a specific audience that I have a relationship with through my life, and that I'm gonna have relationship with to speak to about the things that I wanted to talk to, recognizing that some folks are gonna turn away, recognizing that some folks are gonna be in denial, recognizing that some folks are just not ready for what I have to share, but understanding that and this is the last thing I will say, understanding that my life story is so different than my father's life story. It's so different than my grandfather's life story. So for me to sit here and say that there has not been change would be disingenuous. My father grew up under Jim Crow, in the South. He did not have a single friend cross-racial relationship that I know of throughout his life. So for me to say that there is not change and there's not work and not progress would be disingenuous. Now, what I do is I create space to protect myself and my energy. I don't respond to every email. I don't go to every book talk that people want to have me go to. I don't say yes to every single thing. the book stands for itself, actually. So if you have some questions you want to wrestle with me, I need you to do the work in the book is asking you to do, because the book isn't a passive experience. I didn't write it for you to just sit back and be like, oh, I feel bad for Dax. If you notice in the book, there are questions throughout, and it is designed for you to challenge yourself. And the final thing I will offer is that I was very intentional about the parts of my story that I shared. My love life is not in here. There's a lot of part of my journey. You don't know everything about me because you read this book. And anybody who does, you are sadly mistaken. This is the pieces I have taken that I'm going to offer for the work that we're trying to do here. But believe you me, my story is a lot richer, deeper, and broader than what is here. And I'm not giving that away right now.
I like that you made it personal and to your white friends. That actually gives me some structure to imagine, the power the potential power it has to impact its person, and we grow in relationship with each other. The problem with, the problem with systems as it stands is that when we start talking about the progress, privilege hangs on to that.
Oh yeah.
And wants to rest on it.
Oh my God.
Right? Like that's the biggest challenge for me with noting progress. Genocide's still happening. Black people are still being killed. The injustice system lives with white supremacy at the hand.
So last week.
Right. So I'm tenuous about talking about progress. Actually, I don't talk about progress anymore when I do teaching and consultation.
I feel you.
I don't talk about progress anymore because I feel a sense of urgency. And I'm wondering if you have that same sense of urgency, or if you've been able to temper it in a way that is digestible to meet the population that you're trying to meet, because you can't go in there like me. So
yeah, I mean, listen, the reality is I go in there like me and I go in hot. I think what I have is in what some people respond to, because if you listen to my, I do my talks, I don't hold back and I don't refrain. I think what gives me some latitude is the fact that there are parts that, I'm very intentional about the structuring of my narrative as an entry point into. This is, I think, the power of, when I look at what King, it took me a long time to really appreciate what Dr. King's what he was really about and his power and his work. Like for a long time, I was the person who was like, oh, he's a Santa Clausified civil rights hero. I was very dismissive of him. I was way more aligned with the more radical ideas and idealism, because to me that felt and it seemed to be much more about challenging the power. But when I read his last book, Where Do We Go From Here? The book he wrote a book a year before he was assassinated. Man, that man does not play around.
Right.
He is holding white folks accountable at every possible way. So I think that we're all complex. And the reality is my voice and my message is going to look and show up differently in certain spaces. Absolutely. But the clarity is always going to be, and the accountability is always going to be there. Now, sometimes I might register a different tonality, but that doesn't mean I'm ever trying to in any way appease people or soften the severity and urgency of what we're up to. I move in the world as a 6'1", 200-some-pound Black man. Like, I'm very clear that what can happen to me at any given time, and that has happened to me at any given time. So I'm not in any way unaware of the reality. I am also just trying to recognize that we have to have multiple strategies in the work that we do. And if there's some distinct role that I've been called and asked to participate and play right now, then I'm gonna play that role in the way that I can. In the same way, I'm looking over here and I see such and such, they're pushing it on that level. Such and such is pushing it in that level. Everybody's pushing it together. And as long as we're aligned, we might have different work that we're doing in order to be aligned. So, but I hear you. And I want you to know, like, that's real. And I appreciate you.
And I appreciate what you're saying. What you're saying is very important. I think it's important that people don't see you as a homogenized. And that's why I'm pushing these questions.
Yeah.
I'm pushing these questions because I don't want people to think that you're softening the message, and the way that you explained it is so important. So thank you for taking the time to do that. It really is, it's helpful. The other thing is that, there's so much language that is homogenized now. Everybody can be biased. Everybody.
Oh God, that's why I don't do implicit bias training in general. Like I'm
Oh,
like, because that's just unhelpful. It's not helpful work. If
yeah,
we're not talking
you
about
know,
systems and structures, that's not, no.
exactly. I mean, everybody has a
Ugh.
DEIJ person, and it's all about dropping numbers in, and we still see it doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. So I love that you are using your complexity to tell your truth. I think that's important.
Yeah.
I have a question about ally versus abolitionist. Okay. Do you believe in one over the other, and why? Because I obviously have strong feelings about it, or else I wouldn't ask.
I know. I mean, if we look at the history of struggle, it is a history that demonstrates, at least to me, in my understanding, that it is a minority of people who shift and move culture, and that it is by and large, a mass of people who might get on later in the game, who might, do something on the side that's not going to really risk too much for them, that they'll have any number of explanations and rationales for why they won't do that work of like doing abolitionist work, but will, still try to in some way support the thing that you're up to, as long as it doesn't cause too much disruption to their way of being and to their well-being. And so I recognize that is part of the precarious human condition. People are, for the most part, oriented to protect their self-interest. And there are a few people who have done the work, but also who feel called to push farther and push the edges and push the abolition work. So my aspiration is for a society that doesn't need systems like a prison industrial complex. It doesn't need policing, as a matter of fact, as a form of social control. It doesn't need a lot of the things, we don't need to rely on hierarchy in the traditional sense that we come to understand it. And I also recognize that most people aren't ready for that. They're not ready for it. If that was to come tomorrow, they wouldn't be ready for that. So allyship, it could be a step on the path toward. So there's a both and. You might hear there's a both. I think there's both and. But where my heart is with abolition, but my work is with allyship.
And I respect that. I started there as well. And, again, I got the years in the game. So I started there as well. And then I believe that I shifted because I had enough allies sitting around and watching, and decided to challenge people to step up. I appreciate where you are. I respect it totally. And I understand, it's an and not an either or. I'm at the place where there's only one: get on the bus or get off. Yeah. So, I respect that. That's where you are. And that's beneficial, because what I like about what you said before is, we're all doing it in different ways. As long as we're doing it together, we're headed in the same direction. I'm not going to critique another person from the community who's trying to change the narrative at all. I'm not. Yeah. And that's why I wanted to engage in a conversation, because I want it to be heard from a different perspective each and every time. So I appreciate that, brother.
And if I would, I think that and I appreciate you've got, I think that's part of why I talk about in my book what it means to come from the class experience that I come from. Because I think it's very important. I think there's a lot of Black middle class shame that exists in our society. Yeah. A lot of Black folks are uncomfortable naming themselves and claiming that their experience is what it is. And that shame creates a sense of a need to distance or need to minimize. I have a lot of folks in my world who are not political, or who are very dismissive of political movements that seek to do and enact radical change. They're very invested in the two-party system, and they're very invested in the belief that sort of progress will happen through incrementalism and through the ways in which the system can yield itself and open up change. And I think that I recognize that I am on my own journey as an evolving person, and where I am at this phase and stage has something to do with, being a father of young children, has something to do with, my background and experience, and there might be some evolving and shifting that happens in the years to come. But I'm also clear that as I look again at history, that the notion that we have ever been a monolith and that our ideas have ever operated in sort of a kind of monolithic fashion is not only incomplete, it is false. I mean, if I look at the history of political thought in our culture, in a Black culture, whether it's Alexander Crummell and Frederick Douglass, of course, you have your Du Bois and you have, your Booker T, you have these ideas that are always operating in relationship to one another. And in many ways, they do some borrowing and shifting. And if you look at the ways in which, and they're always operating against the context. What I'm very clear about is the context we're moving into in 2022, 2023, 2024 is very, very scary to me, because white backlash is already happening in a very deep and powerful way. And people need to be clear about that. And so part of what I do see as my work is naming that this thing that's happening right now, like this pendulum swing that's about to go down, where we thought we had some momentum, this is what always happens, actually. There's always this sense that, people are about to, and then we always roll it back.
Exactly.
And it often gets rolled back because moderates are so quick to give ground. And so I do think that there's work to be done on calling in those moderates to say, like, you said in 2020, you were about this work. Right. You said you were about this. So this is the moment right now. You're about it. Somebody has to talk to those people too. And so I do want to have and engage them, because there's got to be because if you don't have those people in the conversation or at the table, then it's very clear that we look at elections in Virginia, New Jersey, and other parts of this country, then we are definitely in a really difficult and doomed condition if we are hoping for the political apparatus to help and support any of the movements that we care about.
At times I feel like we are damned if we do and damned if we don't as a Black community. If we don't vote, then Virginia happens. If we do vote, we get Biden and, Kamala telling how grateful they are to the Black vote and then not showing up. So, how do we convince young minds that showing up in mass, for voting is what's going to move our country forward when it hasn't been? And I'm losing arguments with them, trying to, offer evidence that it has power to do what? I mean, we literally have somebody in there who's turned his head and even said something about Rittenhouse the other day. You trust the judicials? What? Dude, this is the same system you said you were going to challenge. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, my thoughts are, we always knew that we were splitting, that, we were choosing from the moment, there was a point at which, and I don't know where people feel about Bernie, but there was a point at which Bernie was about to take the Democratic ticket, and it was very clear. And then everybody in the institution, at least, or at least the sort of political class, got super nervous. And they quickly, everybody peeled off, they dropped out the race, and they got all their votes, and they sent all their votes over to Biden. And it was very clear that he was a compromise. And it was very clear that Kamala was a compromise too. So let's be, she was not a radical. She never had progressive policies around a lot of things that we care about. So that was never the case. She was a prosecutor, a Houston prosecutor. She might have, we often get confused because somebody presents as a person of color, that therefore they automatically have the same ideas and sort of pattern histories of resistance. And that's just not the case. So my sense is that I never expected that this particular administration in my head, I was like, this thing that is happening right here cannot stand for the next 4 years. We need to have this man removed. I understand he's going to try to come back in 2024. I know that. I know he's going to come back in 2024, but it felt so, whether it was because of COVID and everything else that was happening, it felt so intensely important that we at least got some room to navigate and to breathe. And even if that moment seems to have already passed, it felt important enough at that moment to move in that direction relative to the Biden Kamala Harris ticket. So I never strongly endorsed that as the ticket, but I recognize that was the thing that we were going to be able to get in this particular climate. And that's an unfortunate thing.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. I think that's a great reframe. It's a great reframe. I mean, where we were was desolate. And disturbed. And, where we are is an opportunity to breathe, if ever so lightly.
It's a very narrow window. It's a very narrow window.
Yeah. I'm wondering how do we get the lobbyists on our side? Because that's where the power is. When we talk about Bernie was for all the right things. He absolutely was, but he was never going to win the moderate vote. He never was. And you have to include the moderates in the process, because we see what happens when you don't. They show up and they take charge ultimately. I mean, there's no sense in us having this much power as a party and still not shifting a thing. How does that happen? So it's clear the moderates are still running the game and they hide behind the extremes. So how do we get some of them?
I mean, you said it a minute ago. I think this is a really important question. You know, I think I'll bring it. I've been thinking also in realizing that part of my work really needs to start to incorporate a deep and critical analysis of climate injustice. I feel like that's been a gap in my work, has been both the intersection between climate and race and social class, but also just the recognition of this, you know, the seriousness of the situation that we have. And again, someone who has small children in the world, understanding that that's a reality that they're going to have to contend with. So for me, I do think, as I look at a lot of work, I do work with organizations, a lot of work with organizations. I see a younger generation, to be quite frank, that is unionizing in ways that they never unionized before, like understanding that they got power and they need to mobilize themselves, that are resisting structures of power that previous generation, mine included, would never even think about pushing against and challenging. I see that folks are not capitulating in some of the ways. I'm not valorizing and saying that this generation has got all the answers, but what I'm saying is I'm seeing some evidence of a resistance in a very informed, you know, recognizing that they don't have a future. Their future is very bleak, and I think I need to be in both conversation with folks, be willing to be listening, and be willing at times to follow what younger folks have to say when it comes to how we need to push and move. So if it is the case that they're saying, listen, sort of regular democratic politics are not working, I do not want to engage in that space, we need to do something else, then I'm not going to sit there and try to always convince them that they need to go vote, actually, because quite often the reality is we might need things to devolve to a point where we might need things to devolve, and that might need to be what happens. So that is my position, is like, I need to be clear that because of my wisdom doesn't give me all the answers, and sometimes it can actually make me less courageous than I need to be. And so therefore I need to listen to some younger folks who might be pushing for things that I am uncomfortable with, and recognize that my discomfort with it is their lives, you know.
That's powerful. That's really powerful. When we talk about, you have me deep in thought. That's why I'm saying so much. I don't always say in between. Talking at the same time, and I'm like trying to be suave bolo over here and deep in my thoughts.
This is great though. I love this. I feel challenged and I like it.
Say it again.
I feel challenged and I like it, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
This is what I love. We talk about, you make an excellent point with the young people, and the system may have to devolve before it can rebuild. My concern is the same people being impacted who are always impacted in that process, right? So the pandemic hit, and who's hurt the most? The marginalized community and the poor community. Right. We let things go. We don't vote. We wait till we rebuild. We lose a whole contingency of people who can't thrive. They don't have a medical system that works for them. They don't have jobs that pay enough. And so how far does it have to go before we, as a country, as a community, I mean, the global majority, I think there's some work that has to be done inter-community. I
feel you.
You know what I'm saying? Like the global majority needs to get on the same page, because that's really what's going to create, in effect, change.
You are speaking, I think, I think our sort of orientation towards everything United States is very intentional and purposeful, and it keeps us from really aligning and connecting ourselves to people who are, who have aligned struggles with us around the globe, to the point that I made earlier around my travels around, to Africa, but to other parts of the world. They were not just eye-opening in the sense of like an experience, but they were eye-opening in the recognition that the ways in which imperialism operated in certain countries mirrors the ways in which, capitalism, which doesn't like to identify itself as the United States does not like to identify itself as an imperialist, is an imperialist nation, but the ways in which I've experienced it, my people have experienced it here. So that cross, cross-cultural, cross-national, whatever you want to call it, dialogue and alliance and cult and building is very important. And the questions you raise, I think the ones that keep me up, that stump me, that make me wonder, like, what are we accomplishing? What are we doing? What has changed? Because it is absolutely the case that the same people continue to be experiencing marginalization every single time. And the same people seem to be very callous towards that and very indifferent towards that. I think some of it has to do with us really sort of continuing to build the bridge of the BIPOC identity. I think I'm very centered and clear around my Black identity, and I very much prioritize that identity in the world. And I recognize that it is very important to continue to bring in and connect with other peoples and movements. Native folks in this country, got to connect and understand and be able to be in alignment with them. Other immigrant communities, that has to be part of our work, because that's where alliances live, and that's where the power can live. Because we're 15%, and that 15% is split all the time.
Yes.
And a lot of them can't even vote. So, that always puts us at a structural, not just a disadvantage, but structurally it puts us almost in a position of inability to actually win, outside of a place like DC where I live, where we can always, have some power.
I think that's just so important. It just resonates with me so deeply. One of the challenges for the Black community is that we're not immigrants. The African American, I'll say,
right,
are not immigrants. We don't have the immigrant mentality. We weren't coerced for a better land. We weren't convinced there was something beyond the horizon. So
right.
I do a lot of teaching around understanding the African American experience versus the Black immigrant experience versus the other immigrant experience, and to help people understand there is a difference in perspective. And if we don't educate around that, I'm starting to wonder, we spend so much energy educating individuals or small groups of people. And I'm just wondering what that would look like if we turn that energy to the global majority and start creating a connection that has to do with, you are not my enemy. White supremacy has taught you to be my enemy. It has been victorious based in our grievances with each other that really don't even exist. It's totally created by the system. So how do we get this system to change if we don't get it to change amongst the global majority? And it is by no fault of our own. It is designed this way.
I think there definitely has to be, and I know this word gets used a whole lot, but I've recognized the importance of it in my own life, but some real radical healing that people have to go through and experience, because I feel like part of what attaches people to their specific identity and identity issues and their inability to really connect them more broadly to other people with whom they are adjacent to and have real aligned interests is a sense that their own grievance has not been resolved. In a sense that if I connect my issues with yours, mine will get lost and I won't get a chance and I won't get what I need. And as long as I feel that way, that sense of scarcity, that sense that if I somehow connect with you as somebody who's in the LGBTQ, then I'm gonna somehow get diminished.
Yes.
And I won't get what I need, then I think we're going to struggle. So I do feel like the work people are self-care, healing, all that stuff is so, so critical, because we recognize that folks are so traumatized and have done such little work on their own personal pains. The things I talk to folks about who read my book and they contract to their own experiences in schools. Like I have Black folks that I meet who contract to their own experiences in white institutional structures and the pain that they've had and the sense of being overlooked and the sense that they didn't get an opportunity and they haven't processed it. They haven't come to terms with it, and they therefore haven't had a chance to heal from it. So it still sits inside this like a callus. It's like a thing that's been hardened over but never really healed. And so I do think that a lot of that work has to happen for people. If we're going to connect to an idea of a global majority, there has to be some starting point for some people, and that requires some individual work around healing.
The system even oppresses that idea. I mean, the idea that Black people and people from the global majority can access therapy easily is a misnomer. It's how do we, affect an opportunity to heal and change when it's so difficult to get that insurance, to find a clinician of
course.
color who can afford
course.
to walk
course.
you through that journey, particularly if they haven't done their own racial
course.
identity work. It's very complex. I think we agree it's very complex, and the system is always working. The idea that the Asian community found out that they were not the ideal community when they got attacked. And that's what the white supremacy has led them to believe. You're protected. You're the preferred minority. And then when the attacks came, it was a jolting wake up call. And so what does white supremacy do before we align ourselves with each other? Anti-Asian hate bill. Let's nip that in the bud, right? So that quiets it down and it's not the catalyst we had hoped for us to align with each other. The same thing with the Middle Eastern community, when everything happened, 9/11 and so forth, right? Finally, we get some allegiance.
Well, it taps into something though. It's still a baby, because and what you're saying is so spot on. And I think, there's obviously some deep intersections in that, even in Asian identity. There's folks, and I think we know that there's some deep intersections, and there are people
absolutely. And thank you for
who are doing deep work in there that are trying to shake their own people, like, stop being mad at Black people. That's a conditioned thing to think that somehow Black people are the problem and caused all these issues. And that's what you've been conditioned to believe. So there are folks that are doing that work. And I think, to your point, the challenge though, nevertheless, is like the enticements of a society, the enticements of access are so alluring. They're just too seductive. They're just too seductive for people. So we see even I get so disheartened, I think, for instance, when I see in like New York City, you have Asian communities that are resisting the idea that we need to radically rethink the way public education operates, because so few kids of color, like Black and brown kids, are even getting a chance to access the best schools. And so therefore, but our Asian brothers and sisters see that as a threat to their positionality, without recognizing that, and then I see the same thing at the Harvard Law. There's a big lawsuit at Harvard where you have students of Asian descent arguing that they're somehow being prejudiced or discriminated against because the school is seeking to try to achieve some other kinds of balance. So it's this notion that we have this very linear notion of merit, this very hyper specific and very kind of quantitative idea of what achievement looks like. And that because certain people are able to check that box and do that in a way that white supremacy can valorize, and then give opportunities to, it makes people feel as though they are entitled to everything that they are getting. And they are resistant to any other ways of thinking about the world, or even resistant to the idea that they have been themselves conditioned and therefore become pawns in a project that has everything to do with the continued diminishment of and marginalization of darker people around the world. So it's the collusion that happens, and it's the seduction of the collusion that happens, and it gets played out in our most esteemed institutions because they operate on a very scarcity mindset. Harvard could educate all the students that it wants to, but it chooses to educate a very few because it wants to keep that thing that it values, which is this distinct, proposition of a degree, only available to a few people, right? Because that then filters into all sorts of opportunities later in life, and then opportunities for one's children and one's grandchildren. But as long as that kind of a system is the system that we aspire to, we're going to have this kind of like disarray and this inability to unite around a common issue and a common challenge, which is white supremacy.
And I like the way you note that, this disillusionment, this collusion is so connected to capitalism.
Oh yeah.
We can't ever lose sight of that, and we can't ever lose sight of the fact that white supremacy does not want to change.
No.
Does not want to change.
It's working in many ways. And I think people often are uncomfortable naming capitalism. I'm very clear, I live in a capitalist society. I participate in it in a lot of ways. And that doesn't mean that I don't see that it is deeply, flawed at this point in time, particular flawed system. We saw last year the gains that billionaires had as a result of a crisis. As the result of a health crisis, we saw people's wealth triple, quadruple. We saw, what does that tell you? that tells us something very profound about a system that we've engineered, in that it's run I think a course of, I don't want to say it's run a course, but it's running roughshod over people, and we are very, I think, callous towards that, and our desire then just becomes to be participants within it. It becomes like the best thing you can do is to find a way to get your million. The best thing you can do is to try to find a way to, get yourself safe and get yourself, but none of us gets free. That does not, that's the whole thing. It's like, that's the illusion. Like, you don't get free because you got some money. You don't get free because you have some education. It doesn't work that way.
Absolutely. But that's where, the code switching gets challenged, because when you have had some education and you start to enjoy some of the capitalism, so many people forget to switch back. What Dr. William Cross once said. Forget to switch back, reach back, forget. And that's all about proximity, as we're talking about. It's all about proximity. I mean, that's what you're naming right here.
Mm-hmm.
You're naming about proximity. If I keep ordering so many things from Amazon, I'll be closer to what? No, you're just feeding the monster.
Right.
And at the same time, we want to keep working people employed.
Right.
Walmart.
Right.
There's no bigger monster than Walmart. You can't find poorer people suffering at the hands of Walmart, and yet pouring money into Walmart, because it's difficult to separate from the beast who's feeding you.
Right. And it's fascinating though, because one of the things we did see last year was how quickly things can shut down.
Yes.
And if things can shut down that quickly, things can be reimagined and reorganized as well. And I think that's what was so scary for people, and why they were so desperate to get everything back rolling again, because it's almost like this idea the emperor has no clothes, or the Wizard of Oz, and the curtain goes up. They're like, yo, get that curtain back down. Because they start to see this, we could reimagine this. And that was I've talked to friends who are educators, and I think my friends who are teachers in particular in school systems, in K-12 school systems, the level of disheartenment, and even that's even a word that they're feeling right now, the level of there was a sense of possibility at one point. Mm-hmm. And that possibility got bureaucratized out. That possibility got hierarchized out. It got put back in its place. And now we just have the system. So I have friends who are principals and leaders, and they're very clear now that they're just middle managers. Yeah. And they're just clear that their job is to keep the thing moving and keep this thing, and to not, like, there is not going to be a new emphasis on social emotional learning. There is not going to be, and clearly CRT, the anti-CRT, like anything that was going to in any way help us reimagine this education system is now been completely marginalized. You might have some virtual school happening now. You might have some, some autonomy, like there's some more asynchronous learning happening. Sure. But it didn't change the thing that people thought was possible in like April and May of last year, and June and July of last year. Like, we might be able to, that has gone all of a sudden. That door seems to have closed. And I think that's very disheartening for a lot of folks who felt for this moment, oh, wow, we could do something different here. Even though we're looking at a collapse, we're looking at a crisis, this crisis is an opportunity. And it feels like, folks, we didn't run through that door in the ways that we could have run through that door. We started to fight. We started to nitpick at each other. We started to tear each other down. We started to allow that thing, that white supremacy, to insert doubt. Right. So you started to see all these John McWhorter articles showing up in the New York Times, where he's the voice that is constantly badgering anything that is attempting to address white supremacy. And he just is that voice. And there's other, and it's like in that voice, he presents as a voice, not to pick on him, but he's a very important voice in that regard, because he creates a cover for a whole range of people. I even know many of them who were already seeking to discredit anything that was addressing white supremacy, anything that was trying to call out anti-racism. And it's like that we're seeing it. But I'm not without hope. I think we're in a fight. We're just in that fight now. Yeah. We're just in it.
It's being named in a way that's different than before. And that's what I hear you saying. I hear you saying, disheartened doesn't mean giving up. It means reimagining, as you said, and figuring out how to do it differently. Susie had a question before. I want to get her in before we wrap up. Susie had a question?
Are we wrapping?
Yes, we are wrapping.
This has been a really powerful conversation.
What was your question?
I have a question about the book.
Yes.
And personally, when you wrote it, were you surprised by your white male friends, any of their responses? Was there defensiveness, fragility? Was there anything that surprised you personally about any of your personal friends you wrote the letters to?
So there's two different camps basically I've encountered, right? The one camp is folks who were like, thank you. I needed that. You offered something to me that I had not received before in the way that it had been delivered to me. And here's some things that I want to do as a result of that. I was a point when the book first came out, I had however many folks talking, this is my idea, Dax. This is what I would like to try to do. This is the way I want to use my influence. And then I said, well, maybe not do that. Let's think about it this way. Like everybody would call me like, I want to do a fellowship with Howard University. I'm like, well, there's other HBCUs besides Howard. So we can go to some other places, right? But like they were at least coming with some ideas. And so there's that camp. And then there's another camp that was silent. And I know when that silence was because I know that silence, that's white male silence. I've seen it all my life. It's when I don't like the conversation, I'm just going to be silent. When I don't like the conversation, I'm going to leave. Or if I can't change the conversation, I'm just going to find a way to undermine the conversation, right? And I know that happens. And I know that's what's going on in a lot of spaces. I read a couple of reviews. I'm like, this is exactly what I would expect you to have written.
Yeah, sure.
This is exactly what I would expect you to have written. You have not surprised me in the least. You either didn't fully understand, and B, therefore you used your terms on which to kind of create the sort of grounds upon which we're going to have this discussion about the merits of my ideas. So I think I am clear that a book like mine, a small book, it's not, I mean by small, like not a lot of pages, but it's meant to be a missive in many ways, and it's going to hit certain people. And hopefully it hits certain people over a period of time, and it might do some shifting of their work. I know that there are groups of men who've organized themselves and done work in groups around my book. I know that happens, but I also know that to the other point, like I have friends who I have notably pulled back from our relationship in the last year, have notably sort of not really wanted to engage with me about a variety of things. And I know it's probably because of their views, and they're uncomfortable with the idea that I'm presenting a worldview that they genuinely are resistant to and won't even allow deep inquiry of, actually, because it presents too many troubling possibilities for how their lives are organized. The reality is I've had to engage in that kind of work in order to survive. Like I had to. In order for me to survive in your world, I had to go through the crucible to go some deep, deep, deep work around myself. And so I'm clearer, not clear all the way, but I'm clearer. But I think a lot of folks at this point in their lives, the risk is too great for them to engage in the kind of work that would be required of them, because it will unravel some of the things that they have deeply, deeply believed in and feel a deep relationship to.
Yeah.
I think it's important that we don't let people think, our guest last week spoke to this really well, that we don't let people think being competent is a destination. It's like the Buddhism within Buddhism, they inner peace is a constant journey. Same thing with competency. One is not competent, particularly when it's not your life experience.
No.
So I think that's an important emphasis. And the other thing is that, leadership always wants to expand the conversation when we haven't dealt with the issue of oppression and marginalization in its original form, right? So whenever we talk about racism, and now we've elevated to white supremacy, we don't even really say racism anymore. We call it what it is, white supremacy. Then it's like, well, what about the other community? I know. An expansion to distract is what I call it, because it's not like it cares really about.
It's not even fascinating. It's what I have learned in my work to prepare for They're going to, people are going to try to, how do we make this bigger? That's what they'll say. We don't want this to only be about, those are the prefatory remarks that lead into
so
Black
true.
people, right? Those are the 5 words that lead into about this. But we wanted to also, or I hear like we're doing really good when it comes to women, meaning white women, right? They're doing really good on that, but like we're not. I'm like, well, it's because you haven't actually made any effort to do it, and because there may be some underlying beliefs around why we're not actually in the room, and those underlying beliefs might actually have to do with lack of competency and all sorts of things. And so part of my work is I want folks to interrogate what the deeper beliefs are. And I know in your work that's hard. I want you to not just say white supremacy is bad. I want you to interrogate the deeper beliefs that you have that might be operating for you in your own journey. Because if you drive through a neighborhood of color, a Black neighborhood, and you feel uncomfortable just because you drove through a Black neighborhood, if you feel like anything that is produced by a Black creative is therefore of lesser value and therefore worthy of lesser, sort of a lesser attention, those things can operate in a very unconscious way and get normalized because so many other people are doing the same. But I do want people to challenge themselves, not just to name the system, but name how it operates within you. That's part of what my work is. I'm gonna name how it operates because it worked on me too. It works on everybody. It does its work on all of us. It's the question of, are you going to try to unlearn how it's worked on you? And I don't think a lot of folks really want to do the unlearning work so that they can build something new.
You said it works on us. It does. I mean, we've internalized the oppression from racism. I mean, we have heard those comments, those remarks, those, sort of stories that have led us to believe the same thing. We're starting to break out of it, but it's so unconscious that it's so much a part of our inner work and validation for each other, which is why I deeply value conversations like this. Dax, look, we've talked for almost an hour, clearly could have talked for another hour. So hopefully you promise to come back and we can re-engage, because this has been powerful. I really respect what you're doing. We appreciate you coming on. I love chopping it up with you. It's just deeper and deeper, and that's where I like to go.
That's
so
right.
I appreciate you, man.
Likewise. I appreciate y'all for doing the work that you do, for creating space, for yourselves to present to your audiences new ideas, new people, challenging viewpoints. I'm in gratitude. I'm really grateful to y'all. I hope you have a wonderful holiday season, whatever you celebrate, however you celebrate, that at least there's some rest, some family, and some good food in there, some nourishment. And then we got work to do in 2022. So let's get back on it.
Right on. Well said. I'm going to let it in there. Thank you, brother. Much appreciation.
Right. Peace.
Peace to you.
Bye.
Bye.